What happens when one of Hollywood's most controversial figures sits across from one of television's most outspoken hosts? And the polite smiles fade faster than the cameras can cut. Today, we're revisiting the explosive, career-defining moment when Mel Gibson sat down with Joy Behar on The View, and what started as a simple promotional chat turned into one of the most uncomfortable on-air clashes in daytime TV history. Before we dive in, hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments what you think about celebrity interviews that go off the rails, because this one did in spectacular fashion. It began like any other morning at ABC's New York studio. The audience was buzzing, the hosts were prepped, and the producers were eager. Mel Gibson was making a high-profile appearance to promote his new war drama. Film critics were already calling his long-awaited comeback. On paper, it was a perfect booking. Gibson's Hollywood gravitas meeting The View's reputation for fiery, no-filter conversation. What nobody could have predicted was how quickly that fire would become an inferno. As Gibson walked out to the stage, the crowd erupted. He smiled, waved, and took his seat beside the hosts. Whoopi Goldberg, Sarah Haynes, and Sonny Hostin greeted him with warmth and practiced professionalism. But Joy Behar, seated just to his left, sat rigid, arms folded, her expression colder than the studio air conditioning. "Welcome back to The View, Mel," Whoopi began, her tone cheerful but cautious. "It's great to have you here to talk about your new film." "Thanks for having me," Gibson replied, his trademark smirk appearing as he adjusted in his seat. His Australian accent still carried that familiar rasp of confidence. "It's always interesting coming on shows like this. You never quite know what you're walking into." Joy leaned forward, eyes narrowing slightly. "Oh, I think you know exactly what you're walking into, Mel," she said, her tone sugar-sweet but edged with steel. "The real question is, are you prepared to handle it?" The audience murmured nervously. Even the camera operators exchanged glances. Something was brewing. Gibson tilted his head, studying her with the slow, measured intensity of a man who'd played more than a few battle-hardened warriors on screen. "I'm sorry, Joy," he said evenly. "I'm not sure what you mean by that." "Are you suggesting I can't handle a simple conversation about my work?" Joy let out a short, sharp laugh. More bark than humor. "A simple conversation, please. Nothing about you has ever been simple, Mel. Your past, your statements, your choices." Her words landed like punches. "Should we talk about those?" she continued. "Or are we all just supposed to pretend they don't exist?" Whoopi's eyes darted toward the producer's desk. "Joy," she interjected carefully, "maybe we can start with the film and circle back later, huh?" But Joy wasn't budging. "No, Whoopi," she said firmly, without looking away from Gibson. "I think the audience deserves to know who they're really listening to." "Don't you agree, Mel?" The air thickened. Gibson's jaw tightened slightly, but his voice remained steady. "I think the audience is smart enough to make up their own minds," he said. "I'm here to talk about a movie I'm proud of. A film that tells a story about courage and redemption. If that's not something you're interested in, maybe I'm sitting at the wrong table." "Oh, you're at exactly the right table," Joy fired back. "This is The View. This is where we ask the tough questions, the ones other shows are too afraid to touch. This is where we hold people accountable." The tension was palpable now, almost unbearable. Sarah Haynes looked like she wanted to disappear under the table. Sonny Hostin glanced anxiously toward the control room, silently pleading for someone to intervene. But nobody did. "Accountable?" Gibson repeated, his calm cracking for the first time. "I have been accountable. I've apologized. I've made amends. I've worked every day to move forward. What else do you want from me, Joy?" Joy leaned back, crossing one leg over the other, her smirk widening. "What I want," she said slowly, "is honesty. I want you to stop hiding behind this redemption story you keep selling. Some things can't just be forgiven and forgotten, Mel." Gibson's eyes darkened. "And who made you the judge of that? Who gave you the authority to decide when someone's paid enough for their mistakes?" The studio went dead silent. Every crew member had stopped moving. Even the air felt charged. I didn't appoint myself anything, Joy replied coolly, her tone dripping with condescension. But when you sit in front of millions of people pretending you've changed, I think we all have a right to question whether that's true, or just another performance. The silence that followed was deafening. Mel leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping to a near whisper. Careful, Joy. There's a difference between asking hard questions and picking a fight you're not ready to finish. The audience collectively inhaled, and from that moment, everyone in the room knew this interview was about to become legendary. But I do have a platform, Joy said, her tone sharp and defiant, and I'm going to use it to speak truth to power, even when that power comes wrapped in a charming smile and a so-called comeback story. The jab landed hard. Gibson suddenly stood, his chair screeching loudly across the studio floor. The audience gasped. You know what, Joy? He said, voice rising. You're absolutely right about one thing. You do have a platform. And today, you're using it to ambush a guest who came here in good faith to talk about his work. That says a hell of a lot more about you than it does about me. Sit down, Mel, Joy shot back, her voice now icy cold. You don't get to play the victim here, not after everything you've done. I'm not playing anything, Gibson said, still standing, his expression hard. But I'm also not going to sit here while you turn me into your punching bag for whatever personal agenda you're trying to push today. Okay, Whoopi interjected quickly, her tone pleading. Let's all take a breath here. Mel, please, sit down. And Joy, maybe we can... But Joy cut her off. No, Whoopi, this is exactly the conversation we should be having. She leaned forward, locking eyes with Gibson. You talk about good faith, Mel. But where was that good faith when you made those statements years ago? Where was it when your words hurt people? Gibson exhaled through his nose, visibly containing himself, then lowered back into his chair. But his posture remained tense, his jaw tight. You want to talk about hurting people with words? He said evenly. Let's talk about what you're doing right now. You invited me here to discuss a film, under false pretenses. And now you're dragging up the past just to score points on live television. How is that any different from what you're accusing me of? Joy's tone sharpened. Because your past is relevant. It informs who you are, the stories you tell, the perspective you bring. You don't get to compartmentalize the ugly parts of yourself because it's convenient for your image. And you don't get to use someone's worst moments as ammunition forever, Gibson countered, leaning forward. Yes, I made mistakes. Terrible ones. I've apologized. I've done the work. But apparently, redemption isn't part of your worldview, is it? Sarah Haynes, desperate to break the tension, spoke up. Maybe we can talk about how those experiences shape the themes in your film, she suggested gently. Art often comes from struggle and... Oh, please, Joy interrupted, rolling her eyes. Are we really going to pretend that directing a movie is some kind of penance? That's not accountability. That's PR. Gibson's expression darkened. You know what's funny, Joy? He said, voice low and cutting. You sit here preaching about accountability. But when have you ever been held accountable for the divisive things you say on this show? When have you apologized for your words, for the times you've been wrong or cruel? That's completely different, Joy snapped. And you know it, is it? Gibson pressed, leaning across the table now. You use this platform every single day to pass judgment, to label people, attack their character, twist their words, and you call that journalism. But somehow, when you do it, it's fine, because you've convinced yourself you're on the right side of politics. The studio erupted into uneasy murmurs. Some members of the audience clapped. Others exchanged uncomfortable glances. The tension wasn't just on screen anymore. It had spread into the room itself. Whoopi looked toward the control booth, silently pleading for a commercial break. But the producers, realizing the goldmine of live TV drama unfolding before them, didn't dare cut away. And in that moment, everyone watching, in the studio and at home, knew this wasn't just an interview anymore. It was a reckoning. Don't you dare try to flip this around on me, Joy shot back, her voice rising. I'm not the one with a record of bigoted statements. Mel, I'm not the one who needs to sit here and explain myself to the world. Everyone needs to explain themselves, Gibson replied firmly, leaning forward now. The difference is, I'm willing to do it honestly. I've admitted when I've been wrong. But you, he pointed toward her, you hide behind your righteousness like it's a shield that makes you untouchable. You think moral outrage protects you from being called out. Sunny Hostin tried to cut in, her tone cautious. I think what Joy's trying to say is that some lines, once crossed, change how we see a person, permanently. Gibson turned toward her with a measured calm. And who decides that, Sunny? Who gets to draw those lines? Who gets to say which sins are forgivable and which ones aren't? Is there a moral committee somewhere that hands out lifetime sentences? Society decides, Joy interrupted sharply. The court of public opinion decides, and you've already been judged. The court of public opinion, Gibson repeated slowly, his voice low but cutting. You mean the same court that changes its verdict every few years? The same court that ruins people based on half-truths, then moves on to its next target without a second thought? Now you're just being dramatic, Joy said, waving him off dismissively. Am I? Gibson asked, his tone hardening. How many people have had their lives destroyed by that same court you worship? How many have been condemned forever because of their worst moment? And yet, here you are, sitting comfortably behind a desk, throwing stones from your glass house. Joy straightened in her chair, bristling. My house isn't glass, Mel. I've built my career on standing up for what's right. No, Joy, Gibson said quietly but firmly. You've built your career on tearing people down while convincing yourself you're doing it from the moral high ground. There's a difference? The studio fell silent again. Even the crew, who'd seen countless awkward interviews, were exchanging nervous glances. This wasn't television anymore. It was theater, raw and unscripted. Whoopi tried once more to step in. Mel, Joy, look, we're all getting a little heated here. Maybe we should— No, Joy interrupted sharply, her tone dripping with sarcasm. Let him finish. Please, Mel, enlighten me. Tell everyone what my great failing is. Gibson stared at her for a long moment before replying, his tone calm but deliberate. You really want to know what I think your failing is, Joy? It's not that you have opinions. It's that you've confused having opinions with having wisdom. You think your anger makes you righteous, but all it really does is make you loud. At least I'm angry about the right things, Joy snapped. Are you? Gibson countered immediately. Or are you just angry because it gets you applause? Because it keeps you relevant? There's a fine line between righteous anger and self-righteous indignation, and I think you crossed it a long time ago. Joy's face turned red, her composure cracking. How dare you psychoanalyze me? You don't know me. You don't know anything about my character. I know what I see sitting across from me, Gibson said steadily. Someone who invited a guest onto their show not to have a conversation, but to make a spectacle. Someone more interested in being right than being fair. Fair? Joy laughed bitterly. You want to talk about fair? Was it fair when you— Stop. Gibson raised his hand sharply, cutting her off. His voice dropped, calm but commanding. Just stop. We can play this game all day, rehashing my past, trading insults, but none of it changes anything. The question isn't what I did then. The question is, what are we doing now? Right now, in this moment, who's actually behaving better? The words hit like a hammer. The question lingered in the air, heavy and uncomfortable. Joy opened her mouth, then closed it again, struggling to respond without making herself look worse. That's not the point, she finally managed, but her voice had lost its venom. Isn't it, though? Gibson pressed, sensing the shift. You talk about accountability, about growth, about second chances, but when someone actually tries to grow, you refuse to see it. You'd rather cling to your outrage than acknowledge change, because outrage keeps you relevant. Sarah Haynes, visibly uneasy, jumped in again. Mel, maybe you can tell us about the creative process behind this film, how your personal journey influenced the story. But Joy wasn't done. She straightened in her chair, her anger rekindling. No, Sarah, we're not moving on. Mel thinks he can waltz in here and lecture me about fairness and behavior. That's rich coming from someone with his record. And there it is again, Gibson said quietly, shaking his head. Every time we get close to talking about growth or forgiveness, you drag it back to the past. You need people to stay villains because it keeps your moral world simple. You don't want redemption. You want targets. I'm not stuck in the past, Joy snapped, her voice shaking. I'm holding you accountable for your actions. No, Gibson replied firmly, his voice steady, final. You're holding on to anger because without it, you'd have nothing left to say. The room fell deathly still. Even the live audience, who had been murmuring moments earlier, sat frozen. Everyone knew what they were witnessing wasn't just an interview. It was a live implosion of egos, ideals, and pride. You're not holding me accountable. Joy, Gibson said, his voice steady but edged with fatigue. You're punishing me for my past. And there's a huge difference. Accountability leads to growth and understanding. Punishment just breeds resentment and division. Whoopi leaned forward, her tone gentle, desperate to calm the storm. Maybe we can agree that both accountability and forgiveness have their place. Don't! Joy's voice sliced through the air like a knife. She turned sharply toward her co-host. Don't you dare try to both sides this, Whoopi. Some things are unforgivable. Gibson's eyebrows rose in disbelief. Unforgivable? That's really your position? That some people, some human beings, are beyond redemption? I didn't say people, Joy snapped. I said some things. But things are done by people, Joy, Gibson countered, his tone tightening. If the act is unforgivable, then by your logic, so is the person who did it. You're condemning human beings to eternal damnation because you've decided their mistakes make them monsters. That's not justice. That's cruelty dressed up as virtue. Joy crossed her arms. Justice isn't cruel, Mel. Justice is necessary. What you're describing isn't justice, Gibson said firmly. It's revenge. Justice leaves room for redemption, for someone to rise after they've fallen. Revenge doesn't. What you're preaching is permanent condemnation. That's not strength, Joy. That's bitterness. Joy abruptly stood up, her chair screeching across the studio floor. You know what? I don't have to sit here and listen to a philosophy lecture from someone who what? Gibson cut in, rising too. Who made mistakes? Who said things I regret? Who hurt people and owned up to it? Yeah, Joy, I did all of that. But I learned. I changed. I became a better man because I faced it. And if you can't see that, if you refuse to see that, then you're the one with the problem, not me. I don't have a problem seeing clearly, Joy shot back, her voice trembling with fury. Really? Gibson asked quietly, his stare unwavering. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you've built your entire identity around being perpetually outraged. And the scary thing is, I don't think you even know how to turn it off anymore. The studio went still, not even a cough from the audience. The tension was suffocating, thick enough to cut with a knife. Sunny Hostin looked like she was about to call for a commercial break. Sarah Haynes hid half her face behind her coffee mug, eyes darting between them like a spectator at a car crash. You think outrage is bad? Joy said suddenly, her voice rising. You think being angry about injustice makes someone the villain? I think being angry all the time makes you lose sight of what matters, Gibson replied, his tone controlled but sharp. It makes you cruel. It turns you into the same kind of person you claim to be fighting against. How dare you? Joy hissed. How dare I what? Gibson snapped back. Point out the truth? You want to know what I see when I look at you, Joy? I see someone who's become addicted to outrage, so convinced of her own moral superiority that she's forgotten what morality even is. Joy's face flushed crimson, her fists clenching at her sides. You have no right to talk to me about morality. I have every right to defend myself when I'm ambushed on national television, Gibson fired back. His voice boomed through the studio. And make no mistake, that's exactly what this is. This isn't journalism, Joy. He pointed toward her. This is a public execution, masquerading as virtue. The words hit like thunder. The audience sat frozen, half stunned, half mesmerized. as the air crackled with pure hostility. Whoopi looked toward the control booth, mouthing for someone to cut to commercial. But the producers didn't move. No one could look away. "It's not accountability," Gibson said, his voice calm but razor-sharp. "It's a public execution disguised as an interview." Joy leaned forward, unflinching. "If you feel like you're being executed, maybe that tells you something about your own guilt." Gibson laughed, low, humorless. "Or maybe," he said, "it tells me something about your methods. You know what the difference between us is, Joy? When I hurt people, I admitted it. When I was wrong, I owned it. But you hurt people every single day on this show and convince yourself it's noble." "I don't hurt people," Joy snapped. "I expose the truth." "No," Gibson said evenly, his tone growing colder. "You destroy people for ratings. You take their lowest moments and turn them into entertainment. And the worst part? You sleep well at night, because you've convinced yourself it's justice. You think you're doing God's work." Whoopi finally raised her hands. "Okay, that's enough from both of you. We need to—" "No," Gibson cut in sharply, never breaking eye contact with Joy. "Let's finish this. Joy wants this conversation so badly. Fine. Let's have it. Tell me, in your perfect world, what happens to people who make mistakes? What's the appropriate punishment for someone like me?" "You should face consequences for your actions," Joy said. "I have faced consequences," Gibson shot back. "I lost work. I lost friends. I lost respect. I lost years of my life. But that's not enough for you, is it? You don't want accountability. You want exile." "I want people to remember who you really are," Joy countered. Gibson's eyes narrowed. "And who am I really, Joy? Go ahead, enlighten me. Tell the world who I am based on the worst thing I ever said." Joy hesitated, clearly realizing she was stepping into a trap, but pride wouldn't let her stop. "You're a bigot," she said finally. "You showed your true colors when you thought no one was listening." Gibson nodded slowly. "And that's it, huh? That's the sum total of my existence? 30 years in this business, dozens of films, charity work, raising a family. None of it matters because of my worst moments? Actions